Hello, and welcome to my Treff on reconstructing old door locks. As said before, my name is Crevelt, and I am a blacksmith of 8 years, going on 9 years. And currently, I attend Sataglantan Institute of Sloyd and Handwork, and I'm working towards completing my journeyman, so I get my journeyman papers. And being at Sataglantan is the place where I actually first had a taste of locksmithing with a required project of recreating a old door lock. And actually, the door lock that you see on the left here was the one that I reconstructed. Uh, and this presentation is going to be mostly about general ideas behind locksmithing, just like all blacksmithing areas of expertise. There's a lot to cover, and I could go on for hours and hours on the finer details, but we can save those for the questions later. So, uh, in reconstructing door locks, I recommend to get out there and look at old examples of door locks. If you're in Europe, it's a bit easier to find these examples. Um, However, if you are in the US, you could try old estates or old buildings. But in Europe, I recommend going to finding a castle or a fort or even just an old home and looking at the locks and familiarizing yourself with them and seeing if you can understand how they work. That really is the easiest way to not have to reinvent the wheel if you decide to pursue further locksmithing. And just to include here the photo to the left, because I think this is very interesting. This is actually the oldest known lock found, and it's from the Khorsabad ruins near Nineveh. Nineveh? Nineveh? I can never pronounce it correctly. Um, and it dates back 4,000 years. So there is a long-standing history of locks that just leads to infinite locks that you can potentially reconstruct. And I, the way that I categorize locks is, and many other people do as well, is to put them into these two categories. On the left is a box lock or a rim lock, and on the right is a open-faced lock. Uh, the box lock is, or the rim lock is set on the rim of the door, as is the name. It really is quite an old design. Uh, it You can find often examples of box locks that date all the way back to the medieval ages, which is really quite amazing, and it really says a lot about the craftsmanship of those locks that they've lasted that long. Um, the benefits to a box lock is the added security of the lock not being able to be tampered with, the inner mechanisms. And if someone were to enter the building that they would want to get into later, they would not be able to see the inner workings and thus figure out um, how to later get back in. One of the downsides of a rim lock or box lock when reconstructing them is that if you're not quite familiar with working uh, in smaller detailed works, it can be a little difficult to uh, work within the constraints of the box itself. So that is something to factor in when you are thinking of a lock to reconstruct. Um, Next is the open face lock, which I will not pretend to hide that these locks are my favorite. They're very beautiful in my opinion, and often decorated um, very nicely. Um, but they are characterized by the fact that you can see all the mechanisms and the inner working parts that they have going on. They were used all the way up until the late 1700s, until the modern era of locksmithing came about, and they were perceived to be obsolete. I do recommend these if you are thinking of reconstructing a lock because, like I said, you can see all the inner workings, and it makes it a bit easier to figure out uh, how to make them or remake them. Uh, so now I'm going to go over the general terminology of a lock itself, so that we're all kind of on the same page. Um, this actually is an example that I personally own, so I'm pretty familiar with this lock itself. Um, and so starting from the top, there is the springs, and we have two examples here. This is a coil spring, and this is what's known as a leaf spring, and they each have their own added benefits uh, and uses. Next up, we have wards. A ward is basically anything that stops an improper key from being used in the lock. Uh, so they just keep people out, and they also make sure that the correct key is used in the lock so that it functions properly. Uh, and up here is the bolt. The bolt is fundamentally the most important part of the lock. Without the bolt, the lock would would not function. Um, Simply enough, these are the front and rear bolt guide. Um, those can vary in design a bit here and there, but their function is usually the same. In a later photo, you'll see the wards themselves, but for now, you'll just have to trust me that there's interesting parts to the inside of the ward box, which is the next portion here, also known as the church. And basically, the ward box is a component that the key fits into. On the opposite side here is the keyhole, and the key would come in sliding along the pin that lines it up so that it functions inside the and spins inside the ward box adequately and thus can spin and articulate the bolt. Um, so next, I'm going to talk about how to decipher a lock that doesn't have a key, or occasionally some more historic examples, the museum or the archive that you might find this lock at won't want you to use the lock for sake of damaging it or having something happen to it. Or there just simply isn't a key at all. So you have to do a little bit of imagining as to how the bolt or the lock will be used. So, as I said, the bolt is the most important part, and we know that this is in the closed position, um, or the locked position. So we know that the bolt has to go back that direction. And how I like to decipher what is going on with the bolt and is to start at the very end and then follow it back. And so as we can see on the bottom here, there's a pin, and I can tell you from knowing this lock, there's a hole in this bolt that stops this bolt from going back. There is also, you follow a little bit farther back, there's a little nub here, and this component here stops the bolt from traveling back again. So there's two things stopping it there. So as we move farther back the bolt, we'll move there eventually to where the key will interact with the bolt. And so we know that the keyhole is down here because if you spin the lock around, you'll be able to see that. What uh, happens then is you know that the key spins here, and we see that this plate is here and this rod is here, and we can see that when the key spins counterclockwise, it would push this up and push this rod up as well, thus bringing that up and that down. It's not too complicated to lock, but for more complicated examples, this is the best way that I found to decipher them. And yeah, now onto the key parts. The bit is the portion that interacts with the wards and moves the bolt. This portion here is the pipe or the stem or the barrel. I've included the ferrule, though they aren't always included in every key, but I do think that it's worth noting because oftentimes the ferrule is very pretty and more ornamental than anything. Uh, and then this is the handle here, known as the bow. Cool. Now that we are on the same page for the names of things, we're going to cover the basic general idea of reconstructing a lock. So of course, first step, you have to find a lock that you're interested in reconstructing. And this is honestly the most important part is to take lots of measurements and photos because and as you see here in the photo itself, take pictures with measurements in case you happen to miss any of those very important measurements. I know I am very guilty of doing that myself. Um, but I talked previously about working in an archive or in a museum, so those very old examples, it's also nice to use plastic measuring tools for the sake of preserving the items. And that really just helps out to make them last even longer. Um, but yeah, take so many measurements. I can't stress that enough. As soon as you think you have them all, there will always be more. And now that we have the measurements, we're on to doing the actual forging itself. Um, so I like to forge everything out. You also can just start with sheet metal or just stock and do it all cold. Lots of historic locks were made cold, um, but I do find it more fun to do forging. Um, but you will, regardless of how you go about it, have to do a lot of filing. It really is a key skill in locksmithing. Um, and the first component to start with would be the backplate, as that is the component that has this piece here, has everything built off of it, and you do all of your layout and all of your figuring out from there. Um, and once that is done, as I mentioned earlier, the bolt being the most important part, besides the backplate, of course. I recommend forging next because once you build that, everything else is more or less uh, decided by the dimensions of the bolt. These are just some general tips that I think are really helpful for uh, making locks in general. If you are a little bit worried about drilling into the wonderful backplate that you made, um, or you're not quite sure about the hole placement or making sure that everything works out as it should, use a piece of plywood. It's infinitely cheaper and much nicer to replace. And that really helps you also figure out how the components fit together and whether the key actually moves the parts as they should be moved. Um, Another thing worth noting is that springs were often made out of mild steel because of the fact that high carbon steel still wasn't openly available throughout a lot of history. So mild steel is more than adequate a lot of the time and is actually what you should use. I have personally made the mistake of having springs made out of spring steel because, of course, why wouldn't it be made out of spring steel? And the spring being much too stiff that like the lock will not function in the slightest. Going back to attaching things to the plate, I recommend drilling out the holes smaller than the size and then filing them into place. Uh, because oftentimes in locksmithing, the dimensions are quite close and they need to fit together smoothly and properly. Um, so you have that little bit of wiggle room when you drill the holes undersize and then file them to shape, or you can almost fudge them a little bit, which is always nice. Um, and if your components don't match your measurements 100%, but the lock does function, uh, that's perfectly fine. Historically, you will be very, very accurate. Not often were there locksmiths, specialized locksmiths in the rural setting of the world. And so blacksmiths were tasked with making locks and they would make the components and just throw them on the plate. I've measured quite a few locks that just have the parts all over the place and the measurements make no sense at all. Yeah. Onto the wards. This is the wards from the lock that I showed earlier. I think it's worth noting that when doing a reconstruction, if there are holes in the ward box, you can safely assume that there was a ward there. They were often removed or they just wiggled loose because of the extreme use, but they could have been removed as well in the sense that it just makes life easier for whoever decided to use the lock. And as you see, this ward box contains some very interesting wards, but they can range from as simple as like a pin to quite extreme and being very elaborate. Keys. Keys are also one of the things that get made very, very commonly by the modern locksmith because of the fact that they're missing or they just are worn out. Um, so if you do decide to go the route of locksmithing, I think it's very worthwhile to invest in some time into some key making. And how I like to make keys is out of multiple parts. You can forge them out of one piece, but I think brazing is just so very fun to do, and it's very fast as well as a way to uh, combine the pieces together. And here you can see this key is set up to be brazed, and when brazing in the forge, it's very important to bring the heat up slowly so you have a nice even heat. Um, and that really makes it so that the brass or copper flows nice and evenly. The way that you can tell that you're going too fast and too hot is if your wire melts. Uh, and yeah, then you simply have to uh, do it over again. Um, I always think that it's best, and uh, I think many will agree that it's best to keep the bit in one piece so that uh, it's really hard to have the components like line up perfectly if there's a bunch of little pieces that you have to keep track of. And yeah, I think I think locksmithing is a wonderful area of blacksmithing that can get a bit more artistic creativity, and I think it would be really interesting to see what people come up with. They are an interesting and challenging forging because, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few moving parts, and they all have to fit together very nicely, so they can be a bit challenging, but I think immensely satisfying when you hear that ka-chunk of like a key moving a bolt perfectly. It's incredibly satisfying. And I think you'll find too if you try making a lock yourself. Any questions?
Well, thank you, Chris. This has been a fantastic presentation. Really, really cool.
Oh,
And
thanks.
yeah, now would be time to ask your questions. There are already, whoa, there are already some questions coming in. I read them. You can, yeah, I read them and then you can answer and then let's see how it goes. First question comes from Terry. The images are striking. Is there a source for the images?
The image to the left here is a lock that I made, and I took that photo. Yeah, most of these are my photos. This is a old key that I found in an old forge. Yeah, I think this is the only page that I think this photo is not mine, but I think all the other photos are mine. Uh, I thought there would be more, but no. Yeah.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, Next question comes from Shayna. Is there a resource you recommend for learning improving the filing skill?
Um, I don't I don't know any off the top of my head for filing itself. Um, but there are some great locksmithing books that I absolutely think are very worth mentioning. There's the New Spruce Forge manual for locksmithing. There's also um, uh, a book on making padlocks by Thomas Boucher. Um, and they might touch on filing a bit, but as for filing itself, I think just some get some scrap steel and practice. Uh, that's what I often do when I feel like doing more intricate filings that I'm not sure how they will work out.
Next question. Do you do some research from Paul?
Mhm.
Do you do some research on the steel quality? And do you combine modern steel with antique material?
Um, I don't really do too much research on the steel quality itself. I do know that quite a few of the locks are made out of wrought iron, um, which is a joy to work with. And I have yet to make a lock that includes wrought iron. However, I would love to. I'm actually planning to do a wrought iron padlock for my Yesel project or my journeyman project. Um, but combining the two, I haven't done that yet.
From Christopher Blaus. Which has been the most interesting lock you have been able to see? Related to that, is there a lock you have been wanting to reconstruct?
Yes, I think hmm, there I wasn't able to take any photos of it because they didn't allow photos at the time, but they're in near Falun in Sweden. Uh, if you go into the Carl Larsson Hus, the famous painter Carl Larsson, um, into his uh, painting studio, he has this humongous door lock that is just really, really quite cool. I really wish I could show you a photo, but I recommend a trip there instead. Uh, really, and a lock that I've been wanting to reconstruct. Um I've gotten this book from my partner who gave me a book from the about the shell collection that's based in Austria, I believe. And there's so very many beautiful locks in there that I would love to reconstruct. Um, they're all masterpieces, but I think um, yeah, there's quite a few. Uh, it's a long
What a
list.
nice. How nice that there is something one can still like look forward to.
Mhm.
Um, from Thomas and Friends, what files do you like prefer?
Um, the files that I prefer are new old stock. So finding them at like a secondhand store if they're still in great condition. I really like the older quality. They really seem to hold up a lot better and bite a bit better in my opinion. But as for newer stock, I haven't actually bought that many new files, so I don't have any good references for you. But um, yeah, any file is good, in my opinion, if you prefer filing. But um, if you find some nice small like jeweler's files or tiny files, they really are quite great for getting into the filing square holes for rivets or other small detail work. So just getting a set of those.
Hmm,
Mm,
yeah. Well, I can say I have recently bought a pair of files, and they are fantastic.
good.
If one has to buy new.
Mm.
Yeah. From Steve Rook. Hi, interesting talk. Are there any designs out there for locks?
Um, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there's the new Spruce Forge manual on locksmithing. Uh, it's really a great book to get if you're interested in making locks, because it walks you through them more or less and gives you the dimensions, and there are the designs in there, and there's quite a few different types of locks. I think there's padlocks, door locks, medieval era locks, but I do recommend that one very much so.
Next question comes from Bobo. Uh, what can you say about getting your own locks security graded for insurance purposes?
Uh, I would say it's nearly impossible. Um, Insurance companies really don't like the handmade locks. It's very unfortunate, but modern locks as well as old locks are just a time delay more than anything, is the way that I've been told and the way that I see it. Um, so it's if someone wants to get in, they can get in to any lock or any place. But I don't know too much about getting them security graded other than that it's nearly impossible. So yeah.
Next is a comment from Terry. A recommend reading list would be great, maybe on a banner on the Blacksmith Without Borders website.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommended reading list?
I mean, there's the books that I've mentioned already, but old catalogs, I guess, I think is also a great uh, place to look. They do have more of the ideas rather than the actual dimensions and actual details about the lock itself. But yeah, I can uh, figure it out with Patrick, uh, a list of the books themselves that we can get published somewhere.
Yep, yep.
Mm,
I can publish, no problem.
mm, good.
Um, next question is not related to locks, but comes from Michael Sawinski. How much longer are you in the Swedish school for smithing?
Since I'm in my third year, I will be here till the end of May. Yeah. So, if all goes well and I get my journeyman certificate, I will be back in California after that.
Well, at the moment, there are no further questions. If you have further questions, feel free to post them to the chat. In the meantime, I would have a question, which is,
Sure.
I have had a couple of locks which had holes, but not from the warts or anything, but from rust or wearing out.
Hmm.
I have one time, I confess, been fixing this just with a welder.
Mm.
Um, but how would they have done this historically? Do you know that? Or is
Uh,
there a way you recommend how to fix, like, for example, in this one, the edge where it goes to the take the bolt,
mhm.
there was quite some damage.
Yeah, I think I don't know the necessarily historic way of reconstructing that, but I think they might have uh, just replaced that part, or I could see them very much like brazing on more metal, uh, using forge brazing to add material there. Um, but yeah, no, I think the parts that would be too rusted would just be replaced.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Okay. No, thank you. Um, there's come in the meantime, couple of more questions from Bobo. How come you choose Sweden for your training? And the
Um,
next question is from Thomas and French with school you are attending. So I
okay,
think they're quite related to each other.
sure, sure. So I chose Sateglantan Institute of Slöjd and Handwerk, based in Hjön, Sweden, in Dalarna County. I think that's about three, 3 or 4 hours north of Stockholm. It's a very beautiful place, and the school itself is also very beautiful. But I did choose coming to Sweden, because uh, I had been blacksmithing for a while. However, I really loved the idea of the old school journeyman uh, like lifestyle, and the fact that that was a level of quality that was acquired by a smith. So I also wanted that for myself, and uh, sought that out, and I looked on the internet to see where I might be able to attend school and receive that, and the school popped up. So that was why I chose it.
Next question is again more related to locks from Angela Knop. When making a key for an existing lock, how would you start that off?
So how I would start that off is because this is an interesting question, I want to pretend like you can't get into the building, because that's just infinitely more easy, or not easy, infinitely more interesting, I should say. It's far from easy. Um, so how you would do that is typically in older locks, there's a pin or a barrel that uh, the pipe has to fit on or fit into. And so because of that, and because there's often warding in there, you don't know what the wards look like because you can't see the lock itself. So what you do is you basically make a rough key, uh, what you can assume the size is, um, that you can take away just from the dimensions that you can find yourself. Um, and so you fit that key in there after and twist it a little bit. You'll, of course, feel a ward. So you pull the key out, and with a candle, you can soot the bit of the key. And so when you put the key back in and twist it again and pull it out, you'll see where the soot has rubbed off. And you then have to painstakingly remove that material. You could do it a bit rough and ready since this is just a rough key just to get the lock open. Um, but yeah, that's how you would open up a lock. that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get into. Um, then once that is complete and you can actually take a look at the lock itself, you can um, create a much more fancy key to fit that lock. Um, but yeah, I would typically start that off when making the actual key, the fancy key, not just trying to get into a lock. Um, I would start that off typically by doing the pipe or the barrel, because most things are built off of that. And then I like to do the bow, um, and make that fancy. And then after that, make the bit. And then typically when I like brazing them together, I braze the bit and the pipe, and then the bow onto the barrel, um, or onto the pipe, so that you aren't trying to heat up one big thing all at the same time and maybe have something go wrong. It just makes life easier to do that. Yeah,
Wow. Yeah,
lots of info.
fantastic. Yeah, fantastic. Paul says, thank you very much for this presentation. Success with your school and journeyman certificate.
Oh, thank you very much, Paul.
Um, Another question from Christopher Blaus. Have you seen a lock that has been so strange or complicated that you have wondered if it is actually for using or just a show of piece?
Yeah, there's actually quite a few of those that I have seen. I haven't seen them in person. Unfortunately, I really look forward to it, but there are some very incredible locks that come from uh, Nuremberg, Germany, and they are just out of this world. They have like 4 bolts, and they're all different shapes, and there's just one keyhole, and there's a lot of intricate parts, and it's covered up by decorative engraving and fair. It's yeah, some locks are just over the top, and I think uh, it would be very hard to reconstruct those, but it could be done, I'm sure.
Wow, sounds quite complicated.
Hmm.
Um, from Terry comes another comment. Good luck with your studies, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, thank you very
Um,
much.
I've got a question. Do you lubricate the locks at all?
I do typically. When uh, when making a lock, typically how I like to just finish it up is is almost a bit extreme, but I do dunk it in like um, linseed oil just to add that protective coating and really make everything work quite smoothly. It's a bit messy, but I to get into the like small parts, I found it works really well. Hmm.
Okay. Do you use a boiled linseed oil?
Yeah, I do typically. Uh-huh.
there's come another one from Thomas and Friends. What do you do to remove the scale before filing?
Um, Typically I like brushing my material a lot when I forge it, but there will always be a little bit of scale. How I like to remove scale before doing a lot of filing is do just a vinegar bath. And if I have a lot of parts that I want to file on the next day, I could drop them in just a vinegar bath overnight and have a nice filing surface the next day. So, yeah.
Yeah. Great. Another question from Bobo. Will you take on apprentices when you get back to the US? And would you take anyone from Sweden?
I don't think I'm at a place right now where I want to take on apprentices, but I'm very flattered that you'd ask. But no, I do want to live the journeyman's lifestyle and actually travel around a bit and learn from other people before settling down and then potentially taking on apprentices.
From Monica. Thanks for an interesting talk. Good luck with your studies. The 1023. Sorry about. Yeah, no need. Sorry about that. The dock hit the return. The Norwegian Blacksmiths Association has a meetup at the end of June, and you are welcome to come to it.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic place and fantastic surrounding and hopeful and probably also fantastic people there. I was there last year and it was amazing.
Cool. No, sounds pretty great.
I understood likes this topic so much you can even ask him after this Treff.
Yeah.
He is quite active on Instagram, I found.
Mm-hmm.
So which is at Chris Creates or Crevelt Creates.
Yep, that's me. And yeah, I love talking about locks, and I love seeing locks, and I love other people working on locks. I think they're great.
No? Anyway, Chris, thank you. This has been a fantastic presentation. Very lots of good questions and very lots of new points. So I'm looking almost forward to the next time someone comes to me to repair a lock or needing a key for a lock. A couple of announcements. The next Treff will be on the 22nd of April and will be held by Steve Rook, who will talk about tooling for the power hammer. And yeah, we're looking very much forward to that one. I think I have a bit an idea what Steve will talk about, at least some rough idea, and it's probably going to be fantastic. If you have joined already the last time, this is not new information to you, but we have now this possibility that one can donate to the ongoing of this project on our website. There is a button, donate, right at the top navigation. If you choose to do so, we are very happy. It helps us cover these expenses we have, like web service and Zoom account and so on. But if you are not in this financial situation to do so, this project is about taking borders down, and we don't want your financial situation to become a border in participating. Just so that you know it's possible. And if you feel yourself like you have something you want to talk about, you have a certain design approach which you find fantastic, there's a certain technique you like, Repacy, what have you, certain kind of bending, whatever you think you have to offer to the community. If you want to give a Treff presentation, just get in contact with me or Paul. Contact details are on the website available, or you just send an email to blacksmithswithoutborders@gmail.com, which goes straight to me. And we would love to have you present in the future. Yeah, thanks for the talk. Paul says great. I think this is now the completion of the official part of this evening. Thank you everyone for joining today.